All right, today I am interviewing Scott Sherrill, VP of Data Operations at Redica Systems. Redica Systems, for those who may not know, is a data analytics platform helping life sciences companies improve their quality and stay on top of evolving regulations. So clearly, Scott has a pivotal role within the company as data is the lifeblood of this company. So with that preamble, Scott, tell me a little bit about you and what you're working on for Redica Systems.
Sure, yeah. As my title would suggest, I lead the data operations team, and that can mean different things at different organizations. But here at Redica, the data operations team is responsible for for the whole chain, really, of obtaining the data, ingesting the data, labeling the data, and analyzing that data. So that includes also working with our really great AI team to develop and train these artificial intelligence and machine learning models that can analyze and label our data at a speed and scale that we haven't seen before. But it also includes a lot of still manual processes. We're working with agencies across the globe, bringing in data of different kinds. Some are more automated than others, and then there are different sources of data that require different kinds of touches and different levels of analysis.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you have a unique background that I think allows you to bring some very useful perspective to this role. Tell us a little bit about what you did before Redica Systems and how that experience has prepared you for the challenges you're facing today.
It's been an interesting journey. Uh, Early on in my career, I was actually in law. I was in corporate law, mergers and acquisitions, and general corporate law. And we've I since moved from there to some of the customer success roles, and I went into an operations role. And the last operations role that I had was very much data focused. It was actually very similar to Redica Systems, only we were working with customer data instead of more agency data. As Redica begins to move into customer data, of course, that becomes much more useful and it becomes much more applicable. But I'd say what's really interesting is that early career experience working in the law, working with the FDA and understanding the processes that they have to go through and working and figuring out how we can work best with them. That's just leaning heavily on that experience in the mergers and acquisitions, a lot of compliance and things like that. And then that extends to other places, the EMA, the health agency of the UK, which is the MHRA. All these agencies are similar in their approach. And that legal background has been pretty interesting to tap into again.
Yeah, I've heard recently as last week at the PDA FDA event in DC, that a lot of the FDA data operations folks have legal backgrounds as well, and there's certainly a group of attorneys that help guide FDA employees through the publication of data so that they are complying with FOIA, but at the same time complying with other relevant regulations that apply to what they can divulge and what they have to redact, for example.
It's a challenging job that they have. I can certainly see that through our conversations with them, and yeah, I can see how a legal background would be important for them as well.
Yeah. So data operations and data science are obviously very hot fields. They are, especially with the explosion recently of ChatGPT and other generative AI LLM models, the implications for data operations and data science are myriad, to say the least. Given where you sit and the folks that you talk to in the context of your role, what are you hearing about how companies, and I guess my question would start with life sciences companies, but it could be even broader than that. How are companies thinking about the role of data operations and data science today?
As you said, John, I think AI and ML is it's a huge area, and it's gotten a lot of press lately with the launch of ChatGPT 4 and a lot of the competitors. I wouldn't say that it's new, but it has evolved to a point where it can be used by the consumer and better understood. So our ability to interact with those disciplines has evolved to the point of usefulness, really,
Yeah.
for the average person. And I think that's tripped a lot of approaches or a lot of budgets, maybe,
Yeah.
but it's tripped a lot of folks who are doing these pieces of work where you're dealing with data and large amounts of data in particular to explore these options. When you boil it down, however, if I had to kind of put it in another way, is that AI and ML are really tools to help
Mhm.
you do your job. They're really powerful tools. They can help you operate, I think I mentioned earlier, at a scale and a speed once they're trained that it would be very difficult and very expensive to replicate with humans.
Yeah.
And this can be seen in our own operations, and we can also see it in our life sciences customers. Most of them, if they don't already have a division, are forming divisions for artificial intelligence and machine learning to help apply these tools to their operations, whether those be like the physical operations or the information operations. Now, those tools will be most useful in the information operations first, but it's going to be a quick follow to be applied to those manufacturing operations as well. No matter what happens, though, because these are tools, I would say that the most important is the inputs to these tools.
Mhm.
In this case, it's data. And
Mhm.
that is probably the one thing that my team and I discuss the most, which is let's make sure we get the right data and we get it labeled and organized, categorized, and put into the right places to be used by these tools.
Okay. And do you see the discipline of data operations and data science, which are not the same animal? So maybe you could speak a little bit as well as to what the difference is and how you think about the delineation. But do you think about those two as being pretty unique within the life sciences industry, or are they quite similar to how they get applied in other industries?
I would say they're quite similar. Um, it's it's really a matter of how you apply it, though, and there are some unique things in the life sciences industry. In particular, the terminology is very
Mhm.
unique to life sciences and some of the approach. So while the base is the same, there are things that we've seen before. Very simple. A great example is the phrase GDP. GDP for most people, and for most LLMs for that matter, because they're trained by consumer, would be gross domestic product.
Mhm.
It would be good distribution practices for our industry.
Right.
Very similar. This is a common thing in the life sciences industry, not just acronyms, but very specific terms that are used to denote a whole idea. And to train an AI and ML model to be able to understand that takes time, takes iterations, and you got to make sure that you get it right, or you're going to have some very weird output, I think.
Yes. Yeah. I heard another good example. API. To most of the world, API means application programming interface, but to life sciences, it means, or at least the pharmaceutical industry, it means active pharmaceutical ingredient.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah. Um, well, the let's talk a little bit about. You mentioned obviously for us at the outset of the conversation, you mentioned some of our sources, some of Redica's sources of data. Uh, since a lot of those sources, for those who may not be familiar with our database, a lot of those sources are actually health agencies publishing PDF docs. A big tool in our engine, in our data processing engine, is something called IDP. Could you define that for the audience and then talk a little bit about how Redica Systems is using IDP and what it means to the end product?
John, IDP is intelligent document processing,
Yeah.
and it goes back to this tool that we talked about of AI and ML. And I'm going to get excited because IDP is really, really cool. What it does is essentially take a bunch of old tools, and we're talking about things like some metadata extraction or OCR, which would be optical character recognition. It's trying to pull out and recognize what the words in the PDFs are, or any other kind of tools when it comes to processing documents and getting them in the right places, including even translation, and applying artificial intelligence to each one of those little tools, and then combining them into this long end-to-end processing tool. And the reason that this is cool is because AI works on an array basis. The relationship and distance between words. So if you take OCR, which is famously not good at certain things. Put it that way. Take a PDF, and if it's a little garbled, it'll pull out the wrong thing. It'll pull out these weird characters. But what it'll do when you apply AI on top of it is to say, we can't recognize this word, but all of these words around it suggest that the word should be this. And all of a sudden, your pulling out of the text from this document becomes significantly more accurate. You can apply the same thing towards metadata. You can say, AI, now that we have the text, which you helped us to extract, please read this document. You can get all of the text, and I would like you to identify which parts are the deficiencies, for example, which parts are identifying the inspector, which parts are identifying even the Federal Establishment Identification Number for the FDA. And I would like you to put them in the fields. Now, those fields are visible to my team. We're going to take it and we're going to be able to correct it and look at the document and make those absolutely correct, but it does a great job already. And then when we correct it, we're going to be able to take that as a batch input, put it back into the AI, and it'll be better next time. It'll improve those arrays. It'll improve that recognition. You take AI, machine learning, you put it across all of these tools, put it together as a package, and you have IDP, which is incredibly powerful. Still takes training, but it is amazing.
Yeah, I hear whenever I'm explaining the value of Redica Systems to a potential customer, the conversation I find often comes down to scope and depth of access to documents themselves. And so we know, people in the industry know, that the FDA in particular, when you look at all of the world's health agencies, the FDA is particularly transparent. So they do a great job of publishing a lot of data in the form of 43s and warning letters and so on and so forth. And so people say, well, what's the difference between getting a particular PDF of, say, a 43 from Redica Systems database versus the FDA themselves? And ultimately, a document, the PDF is just the PDF, although I'm always quick to say that the scope of Redica's documents, the number of each of those types of documents that we have, is actually larger than what the FDA themselves publish. But the real important difference is not the number of a particular document type, but the analytics that intelligent document processing, and then all of the labeling and tagging that we have, the analytics that all of that unlocks.
Yeah, it's like you said, we have a huge treasure trove of data. We have 28,000 483s. I think most people who would be watching this are familiar with what those are, but they're essentially inspection reports that the FDA issues after an inspection on a manufacturing facility, for example. We have 15 to 17,000 warning letters, which is the next step, right? Which is you guys haven't corrected the problem. We're going to issue a formal warning. Those are all, the warning letters are available for anyone to look at from the FDA. The 483s are not. It's difficult. It's taken a lot of time to consume these. But to your point, if you had to take 28,000 PDFs and you had to go through, manually tag each one, you had to read them and say, okay, this is a GMP, good manufacturing practices. This belongs to this site. This was done by this inspector. All of those kinds of points that I mentioned before. If you had to do that manually, it would take you years to do. We have not only a team who can do this, but we now have tools and processes and all of these data interactions, which can pull data from the document itself, but also take data from other objects, other sources of data that we have, and fill in the gaps that you can't get from the documents. So yeah, absolutely. We have the tools to help us analyze all of these documents. And then we have the tools to help us pull out more information than you could otherwise get.
Mm-hmm. And as you're having conversations, which I believe you do on a fairly frequent basis, as you're having conversations with some of your counterparts at leading medtech companies and pharmaceutical companies, other life sciences companies, tell us a little bit, give us a little bit of the behind the scenes of those conversations. How are your counterparts at those companies thinking about developing this kind of capability? And are they happy to bring on Redica Systems and essentially just offload that as opposed to building it from scratch in-house?
The life sciences companies, the med tech companies we work with, they've got a lot of smart people who are focused on applying AI and machine learning to what they do.
Mm-hmm.
But they have a lot of jobs to do. They have not only the semi-publicly available data that we have, although certainly not on the scale that we have. They have to understand how to apply that to perhaps their own audits, perhaps their own supply chains, or even, like I mentioned, moving into the actual physical machinery. And it's hard to know where to start. And so what Redica offers when we come in is this depth of analysis on these semi-publicly available documents, which we can then also work with those same team members to say, hey, tell us how you would like to see this.
Mm-hmm.
And we already have this data. And I mentioned before, you can take one source of data, you can apply it to another. So what we're working with customers now to do is to say, give us your information on your supply chains. And it remains entirely confidential. We're going to take the data that we have and your supply chain data, and we're going to marry those two, and we're going to give you a depth of analysis on your supply chain,
Mm-hmm.
let you know what's the health of your supply chain. You know, who are those that are most at risk? Who are those who are the greatest actors possible? You should hang on to those suppliers. And I think for the most part, these customers are impressed by what we're able to do and say, great, I can focus on some other things now.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And I think that vision of marrying up the analytics capability that is inherent in Redica Systems with what some of our customers are building in-house, their own sources of data, their own analytical capabilities, then you start to see a really bigger picture of possibility here, which I think is very exciting to Redica Systems and to our clients.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's also important is that we have a dedicated team to this data. And even if the smartest person is working on something without that dedicated end-to-end data operations team, it's really difficult to do some of the things that you want to do.
Yeah.
So we're able to offer the work of our team, and they do a great job.
Final question, Scott. Let's talk a little bit about look into your crystal ball, and with what you know about how FDA, but also Health Canada and MHRA and EMA and the other leading global health regulators, what they think about transparency of data, and not just transparency, but in the execution of transparency, things like how are they publishing, how are they labeling so that the information becomes more usable versus just sort of getting raw data out into the field. Where do you see that going? Are these agencies prioritizing a move to enhanced transparency as well as enhanced enrichment of data, or are they sort of, for one reason or another, sticking to the status quo?
You mentioned this before, John, which is that the FDA has some of the best transparency out there, and that's absolutely true. They not only will allow access to a lot of data, and you can request it through FOIA, which is Freedom of Information Act, But they also will provide that data with some of the labels that we've talked about before, from GMP, GCP to we call it scope and industry. They'll provide some of those labels to you, and they even endeavor to provide it on what they call the compliance dashboard, so publicly available, so that we don't have to ask for it. I'll note as a side note, however, that the information that we're able to obtain through our requests and that on the compliance dashboard is different. It may be due to different entries, but we can get more and we can get deeper data through our request.
Mm-hmm.
The FOIA law has been generally kind of copied throughout we'd call the more advanced agencies and more advanced world. And so it's called ATI, or Access to Information Law. Every major agency around the globe that has followed some, let's call it the top 40 or 50, they have a version of this law, but each one also balances it between the resources afforded to it and I would say the weight applied to the privacy of those being inspected.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have some agencies which follow a very similar approach to the FDA, which is we want to provide you with as much data as possible. We're going to put it out publicly available or close to that, and we're going to label it. And I think a great example of this is the EMA, the European Medicines Agency.
Mm-hmm.
There are other countries out there who we've asked for information and we've asked for inspection reports. We get it, but it's entirely redacted because they're protecting the privacy of the company. We may be able to obtain one or two things from it. Our goal as a data operations team has been to find the agencies who are willing to work with us, to work within the constraints of not only their laws and their system, but also their headcount, how many resources they afforded to work with us, and to get as much data as possible. And if I had to look into my crystal ball, I would say that as we begin to obtain this data and these insights and even be able to do predictive analytics, we might be able to better work with these agencies to provide them the information that their limited resources will not allow them to get.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully we can create a virtuous cycle there to obtain more data and provide even better insights to not only them, and our customers, but to generally the world.
It's super interesting. I trust you and I will stay in touch on all of this. Thank you very much for your time. And if anyone has any follow-up questions, they can reach out to us through the website, and we'll get back as soon as we can. Thank you, everyone, for watching. And thank you, Scott.
You bet. Thank you, John.
Bye.